what I would like to do is try something here. I've started Waze in 2007, so this is about 16 years old. Imagine that I would have a time machine and I will send you back into 2007. What it really means is that I'm going to take away Waze from you. That's okay. I'm going to take away your iPhone and Netflix and Uber and WhatsApp and Facebook and Tesla. This is how fast the world is changing. Now, what is really unique about all those is that they are all started in the last 15 years or 25 years by an entrepreneur. These are the people that are actually going to change the world. And we, as government, what we really need to do is encourage them to do that, because most innovation is coming from people that have a mission, have the passion to go and change the world. And this is really critical, because when you think of large scale, in time scale, it's going to be happened by entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurship, it's usually start with a very strong emotional engagement, right? You run into something that you really tell yourself, no, I have to change that, right? And I hate traffic jams, right? And then you start to build the dream and the passion until you tell yourself, this is what I'm gonna do. And when you decide, you are actually willing to sacrifice. This is the leap of faith that you are going to change the world. And you have, by the way, you have no idea how big of an impact it's going to create. And it's a roller coaster journeys with ups and downs and ups and downs. And look, all businesses in the world have ups and downs. But when you think of a startup, the frequency of those are dramatically higher. I think that I heard the best quote on that from Ben Horowitz. Ben Horowitz is one of the founders of a venture capital firm, Andreessen Horowitz. And before that, he used to be a CEO of a startup. And he was asked whether or not he was sleeping well at night as a CEO of a startup. He said, oh yeah, I slept like a baby. I woke up every 2 hours and cried. And that's really the reality. It's a roller coaster journey. But it's also, and this is maybe the most important part, you have to start with the problem. Think of a problem, a big problem, something that it's worth solving, something that the world will become a better place if you solve that. And then ask yourself, so who has this problem? Now, if you happen to be the only person on the planet with this problem, then I would say, you know what, go to a shrink. It's way cheaper than building a startup. But if a lot of people actually have this problem, what you really want to do next is go and speak with those people and understand their perception of the problem. And only then go and build the solution. Now, this is one of the areas that governments fails over and over and over again. They look at the problem from their own perspective rather than to look at the users and say, okay, what is their perception of the problem? And then address their issues rather than addressing our own issues. Now, if you follow this path and your solution works, you create value. And at the end of the day, this is the journey of all the entrepreneurs. They're trying to create value. Now, it's a journey of failures, and this is really critical to understand, because if you realize that this is going to be a journey of failures, that you're going to try multiple things until you figure out something that does work, then there are two conclusions. The first one is that if you're afraid to fail, then in reality you already failed because you're not going to try. Albert Einstein used to say that if you haven't failed, that's because you haven't tried anything new before. Bigger challenge for governments, right? In a lot of the governments, what we are actually seeing is that the government's afraid to fail, or the people that are working at the governments are afraid to fail. And the reality is that they're not going to try new things. And if they don't try new things, then obviously they don't bring innovation. The other part of it, and this is really dramatic, if this is going to be a journey of failures, then you have to fail fast. Because the faster that you fail, you actually have enough time to make another attempt, another experiment, and try something else, and you ended up with increasing your likelihood of being successful. And it's a long journey. So essentially, I would call that it's a long roller coaster journey of failures. This is how building startups is all about. And it's really long. For many of the companies, it's way longer than what we would like to think it is. Now, the first phase is always about figuring out product market fit. And product market fit, by and large, this is creating value, right? So this is what we are looking to do. In reality, if you don't figure out product market fit, you will die. As a company, you will simply die. In fact, we never heard of a company that did not figure out product market fit. They simply died. That's it. We only heard about them once they did figure out product market fit, and this is where it's becoming interesting, right? So for a second, I want you to think of all the applications that you're using every day on your smartphone, right? So searching Google, using WhatsApp, using Waze, watching Netflix, whatever it is, and ask yourself, what is the difference between any of those today and the first time that you have used that? And the answer is that there is no difference. We are searching Google today the same way that we searched Google for the first time in our life. We're using WhatsApp today the same way, or Uber, or Waze, or whatever it is. So once you figure out the value that you create, you don't change that anymore. And there are a lot of other changes that happens in order to support business model, in order to build a growth engine and so forth. But the value itself doesn't change anymore. It was, by the way, many years for each one of those companies to figure out product market fit. It was 5 years for Microsoft. It was 10 years for Netflix. It was 3.5 years for Waze. It's always a long journey to figure out product market fit. Once you do that, you're actually on a path of being successful. Now, for a second, I want you to think of some of the top tech companies of the world, right? So Facebook or Tesla or Google, Amazon, Netflix, whatever it is. And some of those are less than 20 years old, and some of those are less than 30 years old. And ask yourself, how much of their aggregated value was created in the first decade of their existence versus rest of the time, right? Now, the first decade, in some of the cases, the rest of the time, by the way, could be less than 10 years, right? It's 18 years for Amazon, right? And usually people tend to say, okay, this is the vast majority was created at the beginning. Actually not. The vast majority created later. Because what happened on the first decade is 3 major journeys of failures, right? So the first one is about figuring out product market fit. And then you need to figure out your business model, so how you're going to make money. And then you need to figure out growth, so how you become relevant for so many people. And these 3 journeys are going to take you a decade. And only then you become so significant. So some of the critical parts of building businesses in general, but in particular in building startups, are actually thinking of those points, right? So who are your users? And what is their perception of the problem? The second, that you stop thinking about your users, you are starting to build stuff that they don't care. And when you build stuff that they don't care, there is someone else that is building stuff that they do care. And this is where you are about to lose the market. Make your mistakes fast. I want you to think of the following. The biggest enemy of good enough is perfect. We don't need to be perfect. In fact, if you think of many of the applications or many of the things that we are using every day, when they started, they were not even good enough. And then they went through iterations and iterations and iterations until they become good enough. And from this point on, if you're good enough and you're listening to users, you are going to win the market. In fact, no one is going to replace something that is good enough. There is no incentive for that. You cannot tell someone I have something better because they don't care. Good enough wins. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution. By the way, this is not just my t-shirt, but also the name of the book that I just recently wrote. And the idea here is really critical, because when you focus on the problem serves as the North Star of your journey. And when you have a North Star, then your deviations are going to be shorter. Obviously, you will tell me, wait a minute, even if there is a North Star, there are cloudy nights. Yes, some of the nights are cloudy, right? And there are some deviations that you're going to make anyhow. But when you have the North Star, you're going to make less deviations. But in addition, the story that you're going to tell is way more compelling when it relates to the problem. So if I will have a time machine and we will go back into 2007, and I will tell you I'm going to build an AI crowdsourced navigation system, then everyone is going to say, yeah, very interesting. But no one cares. If I will tell you I'm going to help you to avoid traffic jams, then you do care. And so the problem story is way more compelling and way more engaging. In many cases, and this is in particular in startup world, in order to be successful, you need to do one thing right, and this is figuring out product market fit. Now, focus is not about what we are doing. The hard decisions is about the stuff that we don't do. So in order to remain focused, you basically need to say no to everything else, right? So Waze is only for drivers, not for truck drivers, not for public transportation, not for pedestrian, not for bicycle riding, just drivers. And that decision, saying no to everything else, is actually a hard decision. Now, the last one turns out to be critical for, initially I would say for startups, but then realizing that this is for all workplaces in the world. So I spoke with many entrepreneurs that their startup failed and asked them why, what happened? And about half say the team was not right. So I kept on asking, okay, what do you mean the team was not right? And what I've heard quite often is that we had this guy not good enough. Not good enough in, the R&D manager was supposed to recruit 10 new engineers and was unable to do that. So not good enough was one major reason. Another reason that I heard quite often is that we had communication issues, right? Something that I actually called ego management issues. And then I asked them the most interesting question: when did you know that the team is not right? All of them knew within the first month. Within the first month, all of them knew that the team is not right. So he said, wait a minute. If you knew within the first month that the team is not right, and you didn't do anything, the problem was that the CEO did not make hard decisions. Making easy decisions is easy. Making hard decisions is hard. This is why, by the way, most people don't like to make them. In a small organization like a startup, it will end up as the CEO needs to make those decisions. And if he doesn't, the challenge is that everyone knows. So now let's look at so this perspective of a startup or an entrepreneur. When we start to think about, so what does it mean in terms of government? What can government do better in order to bring innovation? And there are few aspects that are really critical. And the first one, by the way, is a state of mind. When there is change in the market, which basically means that the market equilibrium shifts, the new market equilibrium is way better than before. Just imagine Uber, right? So the market today of on-demand trips is more than 10 times bigger than before. In these 10 times, there is room for Uber and Lyft and Grab and 99 Taxi and Careem, and 3 times bigger market for taxi drivers. 3 times bigger market for taxi drivers because of Uber. So the state of mind needs to be the realizations that the opportunity is way bigger than the threat. And only then we can start to say, wait a minute, maybe it's not a bad idea. Because the challenge in particular for large organizations and governments, of course, is the following, right? In order to start a change, in order to go into a disruption, we need to start with the state of mind. Whatever we are currently doing is wrong. Now, if I'm alone in the room and there is no one else, even then I have a hard time to tell myself that I'm wrong. Organizations, this is nearly impossible. Just imagine management meeting that there is one of the managers there saying, whatever we are currently doing is wrong. That person is probably going to be fired, right? Organizations have a hard time to realize that they are wrong. Now, there are a few other parts of it, right? The DNA of fear of failure in most of the large organizations is the DNA. And then we have a problem, right? So we may be even thinking that we are wrong, but we are afraid to fail, so we are afraid to do something else. And in many cases, the entrepreneurship spirit, those people that actually were entrepreneurs or potentially doing the change, they left. Now, in most cases, these are troublemakers. Entrepreneurs are troublemakers. And they left because either they got fired or because they don't fit into the organization. And these are one of the critical parts that prevents us from relying on large corporations or on government to actually initiate innovation, initiate change. Now, I know that here is different. I know that this is maybe the only country in the world that I have seen plans for the next 50 years, right? And many of them are really innovative. But in most of the governments, it's not the case. The other challenge is the uncertainty of the duration of the journey, right? So you're trying to initiate a change, and then you say, okay, wait a minute, it's going to take me a decade. But I'm not going to be, my term is going to end in 4 years, right? And so someone else is going to enjoy the results, and therefore I'm not even initiating the change. And this is really big issue, right? Because the state of mind needs to be completely different. So innovation strategy, right? And in many cases, and this is part of the political challenges, is that most of the governments, when they deal with strategy, their strategy is about remain in position for the next election, right? But what we really need to think is what will make the world a better place for our kids. And only then we can actually make an impact. Now, in general, I would say so obviously we will need the DNA shift because of that, but part of what governments needs to do is establish the ecosystem for entrepreneurs and startups to survive. In fact, to become more successful. Because when we do that, we are actually seeding the change for the future generation. And the ecosystem of startup is really simple. There are 4 cornerstones. That's it, right? So first one is entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs coming from 2 aspects, right? Entrepreneurs will go into the journey of building a startup, or people will go into the journey of building a startups when their passion is way bigger than the combinations of fear of failure and alternative cost, right? So if you have a secure job at the government that pays you really well, then the alternative cost is really high. If you are running a firm like Bain and your pay is really high, then you have a challenge, right? Sorry about that. And so lowering fear of failure and actually creating incentive for entrepreneurs will make more entrepreneurs, and the more people that start building something, the more successful we will have. Engineers. Most of the countries don't have enough engineers. Now, the good news is that there are actually a lot of good engineers in other places, right? So for a second, I would say, let them come. Engineers are going to build the future. Experience. Look, ecosystems are built based on experience. And experience, if you don't have the experience in building startups, then you will need to bring it, because otherwise it's going to take you another generation. Ask experienced entrepreneurs to come over and help you to build an ecosystem and to build startups and coach and mentor some others. And investors, right? At the end of the day, we need to make it easy for investors. Investors, for example, if I'm investing in a startup in Brazil, and the startup is successful, I actually have to pay taxes there, and I don't like it, right? If they invest in my startup in Tel Aviv, they don't need to pay taxes in Israel. And so changing regulations that will encourage investors is critical. And these are the only 4 cornerstones. If you deal with them, you actually create the right ecosystem for that. And so the role of the government, in general, I would say, understand the limitations, realize that it's not their government role to create innovations, it's the government role to encourage innovation. And therefore, we need to be an enabler, we need to remove barriers, and one of the barriers is ourselves, right? So we need to remove ourselves from the ecosystem in order to allow others to actually perform. So this is me, or at least a thinner version of me. And I'm building multiple startups. This is what I do. I'm not going to review all of them in particular because we have maybe 40 seconds more. But the general sense of all of them is doing good and doing well, right? So each one of them is trying to solve a problem and make the world a better place. And some of them are in the medical space, some of them are in the agriculture space, some of them are in travel or fintech. Each one of them is trying to, if you would ask me at the end of the day how the world will become a better place if they're successful, I can easily answer that. And this is my book, Fall in Love with the Problem. I wrote it initially for entrepreneurs, and And Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, called that the Bible for entrepreneurs. But then I realized that there are, so many chapters there that are relevant for pretty much everyone, right? And in reality, they are the one that creates value for all business people in the world, for all people actually. One of the best feedbacks that I received was someone sent me, look, I just finished reading your book, and I gave it to my mom, that my mom was actually a principal at an elementary school in the US, and she had so many notes, and she said this is the best education book that she ever had. And so maybe she's right, I'm not sure, but the book is actually fulfilling my other personality. My strongest personality is being an entrepreneur. My other personality is being a teacher. In writing the book, sharing my know-how was about fulfilling my destiny. So maybe one more story, and then I'll tell you a secret. Having this slide gives you as much time as you want after your time is up. And but here is a perspective. Over the years that I've built Waze, there were a lot of people that actually say, thank you for Waze, you saved me from a nightmare traffic jams or from a lot of speeding tickets and so forth. But I think that one of the best stories that I heard was a few years back. Someone came to me and say, thank you, you saved my marriage. And I said, what? Well, because of Waze, we don't argue anymore in the car, so you saved my marriage. So I ended up to be a marriage consultant. But I think that I owe the best story to my son. I have 5 kids, and one of them today is 24 years old and running his own business. But when he started to drive some 7 or 8 years ago, he really liked to drive. He would drive anywhere, right? And so one day I asked him to drive me to the airport. He said, my phone is broken, I can't. I said, okay, what do you mean you can't? The car is right here, the keys are right here, drive me to the airport. I said, no, Dad, you don't get it. My phone is broken, I don't know how to get there. So I was scratching my head for a second, and I said, you know what? I'm gonna be in the car with you, and I will tell you how to get there. Then he asked me, and how would I come back? We lose orientation, but not logic. Thank you.